There's this thing that happens in families, the way silence becomes a second language, how you can walk into a room full of people who share your blood and still feel like a ghost. It was a Thursday afternoon when the message came through. I was in the middle of sorting through tax files at my small apartment in East Dallas, the kind of quiet, sunlit afternoon where time slows down and your thoughts start getting too loud. My phone buzzed with a ping that cut through the stillness like a blade. "Hey, sweetheart, hope you can make it this Saturday. We're throwing Celeste's birthday party at the Juniper Club rooftop. Saved you a spot with the family and the kids. Let me know." Mom. There it was, wrapped in glitter and emojis. Tucked inside a line so casual it almost sounded warm, was the knife. With the family and the kids. I stared at the screen, thumb hovering above it like it was radioactive. They didn't ask if I was free. They didn't say they wanted me there. They told me, like I was a box to check off. And once again, I wasn't Lana, the 29-year-old working woman, the daughter who moved out at 19, paid her way through college, kept her head down and mouth shut. I was Lana, the kid who never quite grew up in their eyes, the one who always got the folding chair at the end of the table. I put the phone face down and stared at nothing for a good 5 minutes. I told myself not to let it bother me, that it was just a message, just another family event I could survive, like all the others. But something about this one, it stung differently. Maybe because it was Celeste. Celeste, my perfect cousin, my mother's pride and joy, even though she wasn't even her kid. The girl who got straight A's, homecoming queen, Harvard Business School grad, now launching a wellness startup with investors and buzz. And me, I was the afterthought, the one with the flexible job and artistic lifestyle, the one who'd once gotten a poetry scholarship, and somehow that translated into, "Let's make sure she sits with the kids," again. I didn't respond, not right away. I let the message sit there like a ticking bomb while I went back to sorting receipts, pretending my chest didn't feel tight. That night, I called D. Ruth. She was the only one who ever really saw me in that family. We didn't talk often anymore, not after whatever happened between her and my mom years ago. But I guess I just needed to hear someone who'd call bullshit if they saw it. She picked up after the third ring. "Lana," she said, voice raspy, like she'd been napping. "Sorry to call late," I said. "Didn't mean to bother you." "You never bother me," she said. "Something wrong?" I paused. The words didn't want to come out. "Mom invited me to Celeste's party," I said finally. "She said I have a seat with the kids." Silence. Then, "Still playing that game, huh?" I could have cried right there. "She knows what she's doing," D. Ruth said. "She always has." And I knew she was right, but it still hurt. It wasn't just a seat, it was a message, a place setting wrapped in decades of microaggressions and weaponized smiles. By Saturday afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself not to go. I told myself I had work, I had groceries to buy, laundry to do. But deep down, I knew why I'd show up anyway. Because if I didn't, they'd say I was dramatic, that I was being selfish, that I couldn't just let Celeste have her moment. So at 6 p.m., I stood in front of the mirror wearing a navy-wrapped dress that made me feel like someone who had their life together. I looked like an adult. I looked like I belonged. I looked like someone who wouldn't be seated next to a booster seat and a pile of chicken nuggets. But you already know how this goes. The Juniper Club was lit with golden lights and soft music. I gave the hostess my name, and after scanning the guest list, she smiled and said, "Ah, table 9, with the kids and family, right this way." I didn't say anything. I didn't argue. I followed her to a corner of the rooftop, where balloons and plastic cups sat beside coloring books. I sat down, invisible, and smiled at a 7-year-old who didn't smile back. Across the room, Celeste laughed, glowing in a white cocktail dress that probably cost more than my rent. She was surrounded by people who saw her. My mother walked past with a glass of wine, gave me a tight smile and said, "Glad you made it," before disappearing into the crowd. I didn't touch the food. I didn't speak to anyone. I just sat and waited and watched. And when they brought out the cake, when they toasted Celeste, and thanked every damn person in the room, except me, I stood up, and I left. I walked right past the bar, past the valet, down 2 blocks in heels that pinched like hell. I didn't look back, because I already knew no one noticed. Not really. And that night, as I drove back through the city lights, the question burned like acid in my throat. How do you grieve a family that's still alive? Have you ever been the ghost at your own family's table? Drop a heart in the comments if you've felt it too. Your story matters. And if you're still reading, don't forget, this isn't where the story ends. This is where it begins. They say people show you who they are when they think no one's watching. But what they don't tell you is it hurts just the same, even when you are watching. The Juniper Club was every bit as polished and pretentious as I expected. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows, golden pendant lights, and the kind of hushed laughter that sounded rehearsed. There were valet guys in tuxedos and influencers filming Instagram stories before the party even started. And I stood there in a wrap dress and heels that felt too tight, holding my clutch like it could protect me. "Hi, I'm here for the Montgomery party," I said to the hostess. She didn't even look up, just scrolled through her iPad and said, "Westbrook, Lana, right?" I nodded. "Table 9, she said. "With the family and the kids, just past the railing near the patio fountain." That was the moment. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, it was calculated. I walked toward the table slowly, each step heavier than the last. The party hadn't officially started yet, but people were already clinking glasses, laughing too loud, pretending like this wasn't a photo shoot disguised as a birthday. Table 9 sat in the farthest corner, 2 booster seats, a stack of coloring books, and a plastic centerpiece shaped like a unicorn. Someone had spilled apple juice. This wasn't just a seat. This was my place. I sat down in silence, lips pressed tight. No one looked my way. A 6-year-old next to me asked if I had a phone charger. That was the only acknowledgement I got. The adults, my family, were gathered near the open bar, swirling cocktails like royalty in exile. My mother was in her element, laughing at some joke I couldn't hear, hand grazing a man's shoulder she probably met 5 minutes ago. She looked radiant, effortless. I was 29 years old, sitting at the kids' table in my best dress, with nowhere to put my dignity. Celeste made her entrance 20 minutes later. The music shifted. Phones went up. People clapped like she was a bride walking down the aisle. She wore this cream silk dress that hugged her like a secret, hair curled in soft waves, makeup flawless. She was glowing. Of course she was. Someone handed her a mic. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said, like a TED Talk host. "This year's been big for me. Big risks, big growth, big gratitude." The crowd swooned. I didn't move. She continued, thanking people one by one. Her mentors, her fiancé, her investors, her friends from college. Even the bartender got a name drop. But not me. Not even a glance. My name might as well have been erased from the family tree that night. At one point, she toasted to the people who lift you up even when you don't notice. And half the table turned to look at my mom. She smiled, proud. I stayed seated, invisible. I don't remember much after that. Someone brought cake. There were more speeches. My legs started cramping from sitting so still. And then, at 9:23 p.m., I stood up and walked away. Not a single person stopped me. No one asked where I was going. I passed by the bar, the photo booth, the bathroom line. I could have been a shadow, a breeze, a glitch in the system. Outside, the air was thick with Texas heat, but it felt easier to breathe. I didn't cry. I just kept walking. 2 blocks down, I found my car and sat in the driver's seat with the engine off. I looked at my hands gripping the wheel like they weren't mine. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe a lifetime. And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the table. It was about all the tables I'd ever been shoved under. Every birthday I spent taking the photo instead of being in it. Every Christmas where I wrapped gifts no one remembered I gave. Every maybe next time, and you're being too sensitive, and don't make this about you. This wasn't new, it was just the first time I couldn't pretend it didn't hurt. When I finally drove off, the lights of downtown Dallas blurred past me like ghosts. I told myself I was done. Done being polite. Done making myself small. Done pretending crumbs were a feast. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't know, was that walking out of that party wouldn't be the end. It would be the match. And the whole house was about to burn. If you've ever been handed a seat at a table you never asked for, if you've ever swallowed your voice just to keep the peace, this story is for you. Drop a candle in the comments if you've ever walked away from a place you were never welcome in. And if you're still watching, thank you for making it this far. You're not invisible. Not here. It started raining just outside of Denton. The kind of rain that doesn't fall, it presses, like the sky's been holding it in for too long, and finally decides to let go all at once. I didn't turn on the music. I needed the silence. Just me, the road, and the sound of wipers working overtime like they were trying to wipe the night clean. But you can't erase what's already under your skin, not when it's been there for years. I kept replaying the moment I walked out of the Juniper Club, not because anything dramatic happened, no shouting, no confrontation. That would have at least meant someone saw me. But no, I left in silence, and the silence followed me. The more the miles slipped by, the more I thought about all the times I'd done that before. Slipped away, bit my tongue, let it go, played nice, like that Christmas when I was 14, and my gift was a clearance sweater, 3 sizes too big, with the tag still on it. Celeste got a brand new camera, and a promise that she'd make memories with it. I remember sitting on the couch, smiling like it didn't matter, like it was funny. It wasn't. Or the year I graduated college, early, and no one showed up to the ceremony. Mom said she thought I didn't want to fuss. Celeste had 5 rows of guests and custom cupcakes when she got her MBA. Even then, I convinced myself it wasn't personal, that it was just bad timing, that maybe I was too sensitive. But tonight stripped away every excuse I'd ever made for them. Because this wasn't a slip-up. It wasn't a scheduling error or miscommunication. It was a choice. A choice to place me at the kids' table. A choice to never say my name. A choice to keep me small enough to forget. The ache in my chest wasn't new. It was old, familiar. A kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just settles. Quiet and constant. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, knuckles pale. This wasn't about a birthday party. This was about every birthday party. Mine included. The last one I remember was when I turned 12. It was a gray, cold February afternoon. I came home from school and smelled frosting. My heart jumped. I thought maybe Mom had planned a surprise. But the balloons were pink and gold, Celeste's colors. Cupcakes lined the counter. A 10 candle stuck proudly into the middle one. I stood there in the doorway, like a stranger in my own kitchen. My birthday had been 3 weeks earlier. I spent it alone in my room, eating a gas station cupcake and watching reruns of Friends. When I asked Mom later why we didn't do anything, she laughed and said, "You're older now, Lana. You don't need all that." Like growing up meant outgrowing being seen. I didn't respond. I just nodded and swallowed it down like always. Tonight, the memory came back like it had teeth. The rain started to slow as I passed the city limits. Dallas lights flickered ahead, like stars too far away to touch. I felt that familiar tightness under my ribs, an old bruise that never quite healed. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, it was close to midnight. The air was thick and humid. My dress clung to my skin like regret. Inside, the place was still. I kicked off my heels and stood by the window, watching the rain fade to mist across the glass. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel angry, or sad, or bitter. I felt done making excuses, done trying to earn a seat at a table that was never mine, done pretending invisible wasn't the same as unwanted. I didn't know what came next, but I knew this much. I wasn't going back. If you've ever driven home in the dark, with nothing but old memories riding shotgun. If you've ever swallowed your pain so long you forgot how to spit it out, this story is yours too. Drop a heart eyes in the comments if you've ever realized the people who were supposed to love you didn't even see you. You're not alone. And this story, it's just getting started. There's a kind of grief that doesn't come from losing something. It comes from never having it in the first place. The night after the party, I barely slept. I kept pacing the apartment like the walls were closing in. There was this restlessness in my chest, like something was trying to break its way out. So I did what I always do when I can't breathe. I cleaned. By 2 a.m., every counter had been scrubbed, every drawer reorganized, every cabinet wiped down. But the silence was louder than ever. And when I sat down on the couch, a memory hit me so hard, it felt like whiplash. I was 7. It was the school's Thanksgiving pageant. I had one line, just one. I practiced it for a week straight in front of the mirror, wearing my paper feather headdress like it was a crown. I told Mom the show started at 5:30. I even reminded her that morning before I got on the bus. I waited all through the performance, scanning the audience, hoping to see her face. She didn't come. When I asked her later why, she just said, "It's not that big of a deal, Lana. It's just a school thing." But it was a big deal to me. And that's when I first learned that being disappointed by your mother doesn't always look like shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it just looks like an empty seat. That's how it always was with her. Quiet, dismissive, polite indifference. If I cried, I was dramatic. If I asked for attention, I was selfish. If I succeeded, it was brushed off. If Celeste succeeded, it was celebrated. I remember when Celeste got her driver's license. Mom bought her a silver bracelet with the word fearless engraved on it. When I got mine a year later, she handed me a folded map and told me to be careful. It was subtle, always subtle. But it chipped away at me like water against stone. Not loud enough to call out, but constant enough to change me. Over time, I stopped telling her when something good happened. I stopped inviting her to things. I stopped expecting anything, because expecting hurt worse than being ignored. By the time I was a teenager, I had perfected the art of shrinking. I dressed in neutrals. I spoke softly. I avoided conflict like it was fire. I made myself small in every room, hoping maybe that would make me more lovable. It didn't. And the worst part, I thought it was my fault, because no one told me that sometimes love isn't withheld because you're unworthy, but because they're incapable. They don't have it to give. I didn't have the words for that back then. I just thought I was broken. Celeste was the opposite, bright, magnetic, loud in a way that didn't annoy anyone. She took up space and was rewarded for it. I took up nothing and was still somehow too much. There was one person who saw it, Ruth. She used to sneak me books when no one was paying attention, sat through every boring school play, called me fire in disguise, even when I didn't feel like a spark. But then one day she just stopped coming around. No goodbye, no fight, just vanished. Later, I overheard Mom on the phone, whispering something about Ruth being too involved and crossing boundaries. I didn't understand it then. Now I do. She saw too much. She saw me. That was the pattern. Anyone who saw me really saw me, either left or got pushed out. And I stayed, year after year, convincing myself that loyalty meant silence. Until it didn't. Until Saturday night. Until that goddamn table. Now I was sitting on the couch at 3:12 a.m., staring out the window, realizing that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy. Maybe the weight I'd been carrying all these years wasn't imaginary. Maybe it was evidence. I wasn't just hurt, I was buried. And I'd finally started digging. If you grew up learning how to disappear just to survive, if you were taught that being easy to love meant being easy to forget, this story is yours too. Drop a fire in the comments if you've ever felt like the more quiet you became, the more they erased you. You are not a ghost. You are not too much. You were just born into a room too small for your fire. The thing about silence is, it has an expiration date. You can ignore the ache. You can stuff it down, Hide it under work, chores, smiles. But eventually it surfaces, louder, sharper, and ready to tear through whatever peace you pretended to have. For me, it came on a Monday, 2 days after the party. I was back in my apartment, trying to lose myself in emails and invoices, pretending I hadn't walked out of my cousin's birthday like a ghost, finally realizing it was dead. The world didn't stop spinning. People were still posting food pics. My coworkers still replied, per my last email. The laundry still piled up, but something in me had shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just moved differently, quieter, focused, like I was bracing for a storm I hadn't fully named yet. And then my phone buzzed. Jasper Reed. I froze. I hadn't spoken more than 5 sentences to Jasper in all the years he'd been around. Celeste's perfect fiancé. The one who always brought wine to family dinners, who held doors, who nodded politely, and never lingered too long in a room with me. Why the hell was he texting me? Hey Lana, can we talk? Coffee tomorrow morning? That was it. No context, no emojis, just those 7 words. I stared at it like it might bite me. Something about it didn't feel casual, didn't feel like a just checking in message. It felt deliberate, precise, like the first move in a game I hadn't agreed to play. I didn't respond right away. I went to the kitchen, made coffee I didn't want, sat down on the couch, and stared at the ceiling for 15 full minutes. Then I texted back, "What time?" The next morning, the sky was overcast. One of those pale, dull Texas mornings where the air feels heavier than the clouds. I drove to a quiet cafe downtown, the kind with exposed brick walls and uncomfortable wooden chairs that make you feel like you're in a movie you didn't audition for. Jasper was already there when I arrived. No suit, just jeans and a button down, sleeves rolled. He looked like he hadn't slept. His coffee sat untouched in front of him, hands wrapped around the cup like he needed the heat more than the caffeine. He stood when he saw me. "Lana," he said. And for once, it wasn't polite. It was tense. I sat down slowly. "All right," I said. "What's this about?" He looked around, twice, then leaned in like someone might be listening. "I probably shouldn't be here," he started. "Then don't waste my time," I said, sharper than I meant to. But he didn't flinch. "Before the party," he said quietly, "I overheard Celeste and your mom talking." My stomach dropped. He kept going. "They were in the lounge, near the back. Thought no one was around yet. They didn't see me." His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. "They were laughing about you," he said. I felt my fingers curl into fists under the table. "They said you'd finally get the message when they sat you with the kids, that it was time you knew your place." He hesitated. "And then your mom said she'll never leave. She needs us more than we need her." There it was. The strike. Clean. Cruel. Surgical. I didn't speak. I couldn't. The humiliation wasn't new, but hearing it confirmed by someone outside the circle, that cut differently. Jasper looked at me, guilt etched deep across his face. "I didn't know what to do," he said. "At first, I thought it was just a stupid joke, but the way you left, I realized it wasn't the first time." "No," I said quietly. "It never is." He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath since Saturday. "They talk about you like you're a problem to manage, not a person." I met his eyes, and for the first time in this mess, I didn't feel crazy. "I'm sorry," he said, but I didn't want his apology, because it wasn't his betrayal. "It's not your fault," I said, "but you need to understand something." He nodded, waiting. "This isn't just about the party. This is about years of being erased, one table, one silence at a time." He looked down, and I knew, deep down, he had questions about Celeste that had nothing to do with me. But that wasn't my job to solve. I stood up. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "But this isn't your fight." He nodded again, slower this time, and I left him there, in that too-perfect cafe, with a storm rolling in behind me. Because if they wanted me quiet, if they thought I'd stay small forever, what came next would prove they were dead wrong. If you've ever been told to stay in your lane, to shrink for someone else's comfort, to play the part they wrote for you, this chapter is yours. Drop a in the comments if you've ever felt the moment the silence cracked. And if you're still here, keep going. The truth always sounds loudest, right before they try to shut it down. There's a point where silence stops being self-preservation and starts feeling like surrender. I think I passed that point the moment Jasper said, "They wanted you to know your place." That line stuck with me, played on a loop while I tried to work, while I tried to sleep, while I stood in the grocery store staring at a shelf of cereal for 10 minutes straight. I kept thinking, what place? Where exactly had they put me? And more importantly, who decided I had to stay there? That week, I started digging. Not out of revenge, not yet, out of instinct. A pull, a whisper in the back of my mind that said, look closer, look back, look deeper. I went through old drawers, boxes in my closet I hadn't opened in years. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Just something that would prove I wasn't imagining it, that this wasn't all in my head. That's when I found it. An old tax envelope from 5 years ago, buried under a stack of college binders and dusty notebooks. My name was on it, but I hadn't filed taxes that year. Not with that address, not with that job title, not with that income. I opened it slowly, heart pounding. It was a W-2, issued to a small wellness brand I'd never worked for. The same name Celeste had mentioned once, in passing, when talking about early prototypes and branding trials. A ghost company that never launched, supposedly. I flipped through the rest of the envelope. There were 2 more forms, both signed, both under my name. I didn't recognize the signature, but I knew exactly who had written it. My mother and Celeste. They'd used me, maybe to test something, maybe to funnel something, maybe just because I was easy to use, because I never asked questions, because I always smiled and nodded and said, it's fine. I wasn't fine. I couldn't breathe. The next morning, I drove across town to a small, 2-story brick house with a crooked mailbox and roses that hadn't been trimmed since spring. Ruth answered before I could even knock. She looked older, softer, worn in the way only people with too much truth and too few listeners get. "Lana," she said, voice cracking like the hinge of an old door. "You finally came." I nodded. My throat didn't work yet. She led me inside. No small talk, no tea, just silence and knowing. "I've been waiting for this day," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For you to stop defending people who never defended you." That broke something in me. I sat down on her faded blue couch and finally asked, "Why did you disappear?" She looked at me for a long time before answering. "Because I tried to protect you," she said. "And your mother didn't like that." She reached into a side drawer and pulled out a yellowed envelope, edges soft from time and guilt. "This was for you," she said. "From your dad. He gave it to me when he left. Told me to wait until you were ready." I took it with shaking hands. Inside was a single-page letter. The handwriting was his. I remembered the loops in his G's. "Lana, if you're reading this, it means the silence didn't hold. I'm sorry I left. But it wasn't by choice. I was pushed. I fought for you. I did. But when people refuse to see their own harm, they turn anyone who tries to stop it into the enemy. Ruth was the only one who believed me. You were never the problem. You were the light. Don't let them dim it. Love, Dad." I didn't cry. I wanted to. But the rage was louder, because I remembered how she told me he abandoned us, how she said he couldn't handle fatherhood, how she called him weak, selfish. She erased him, the way she erased me. I stood up. "I have to go," I said. Ruth nodded. "You know where to find me." I drove straight to her house, my mother's house. She opened the door in yoga pants and a glass of white wine. She smiled like nothing had ever happened. "Lana, what a surprise. Come in." I didn't. "I found the tax forms," I said. "The ones you filed in my name." Her smile faltered, just for a second. "You're being dramatic," she said. "That was years ago. Nothing ever came of it." "It was fraud," I said. Her eyes narrowed. You don't understand how these things work. No, I said. But I understand how you work. She stepped back, glass trembling slightly. You always twist everything, always making yourself the victim. And you always hide behind family when you get caught, I snapped. She set the wine down. Don't talk to me like that. I'm your mother. Number. You're the woman who taught me love was something I had to earn by being quiet. Silence. Then she hissed, so what? You're going to ruin everything over old paperwork? Over something Celeste did? I stepped closer. Number, I'm going to stop letting you rewrite the story. That's it. Her voice dropped. You're going to tear this family apart. I met her eyes, steady and unflinching. Maybe it needs to break, and I walked away. If you've ever discovered a truth that burned more than the lie it replaced, if you've ever had to look someone you love in the eye and choose yourself instead, this chapter is yours. Drop a lock in the comments if you've ever uncovered the thing they never thought you'd find, because sometimes healing doesn't start with forgiveness. Sometimes it starts with saying enough. I thought walking away would be the hard part. Turns out, staying away was harder. The silence didn't last. It never does. Not in families like mine, where gossip spreads faster than apologies, and the truth gets buried beneath layers of performative grace. It started small. A weird look from a coworker in the break room. A neighbor who suddenly stopped making eye contact. Then came the texts, from people I hadn't heard from in years. Hey, heard you've been going through something. Hope you're getting help. Your mom said you left the party upset. Are you okay? Just wanted to say, we love you, even if you're lashing out right now. Lashing out, spiraling, overreacting. They were painting me unstable, unwell, unhinged. The classic script: if you can't control the truth, discredit the one telling it. My mother was behind it. I didn't need proof. I knew her voice, even when someone else said the words. Celeste joined in, of course. The golden child turned golden victim. She deleted her Instagram, claimed she was being cyberbullied, quietly slipped messages to family members that I had always resented her success. She didn't have to lie big, just enough to tilt the narrative, just enough to make me look bitter. And it worked, at least for a while. People pulled back, my inbox dried up. The family group chat went silent, except for one passive-aggressive meme about letting go of toxic energy. But the thing is, I wasn't panicking. I was planning. And I had something they didn't. Proof. The forged W-2s, the paper trail, the timeline, the letter from my father. So I did what they never expected me to do. I hit send. I forwarded everything to Jasper. Every document, every manipulated signature, every lie wrapped in family branding. No dramatic message, just, you deserve to know the truth before you marry into this. He didn't reply right away, but 3 days later, I got a call. Hey, he said. His voice was steady, but I could hear the exhaustion. I ended it. I didn't ask with who. I already knew. She denied it at first, then tried to twist it. Blame you. Said it was just business stuff. No big deal. Of course she did. He paused. I told my parents. The investors pulled out this morning. It's all unraveling. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window. The Dallas skyline never looked so still. She'll blame you, I said quietly. She already does. That was the moment I knew it was done. The illusion, the image, the pedestal. They could smear my name, but I had already taken it back. The next week, I packed up my apartment. I didn't leave in the middle of the night or make a social post about new beginnings. I just moved to a smaller city outside Houston. Quiet, unfamiliar, uncomplicated. I got a little rental house with chipped paint and creaky floors. The kind of place where I didn't have to apologize for taking up space. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was running away. I felt like I was walking towards something. Freedom, maybe, myself, definitely. I started a blog. At first, it was just a place to write, to let the words fall out without worrying about judgment or manipulation or some cousin screenshotting it for a group chat I was no longer in. But people found it, quietly, slowly, like moths, to a soft light. People who'd been disowned, dismissed, discarded by the people who were supposed to love them the most. They wrote to me. Long emails, anonymous comments, voice notes. They all said some version of the same thing. I thought it was just me, and that's when I knew I hadn't just burned the old table. I was building a new one. Different rules, different seats, no shame. And at that table, no one had to earn their worth. They just had to show up. Grief has strange timing. It doesn't always hit you in the middle of the storm. Sometimes it waits until the sky clears, until the dust settles, until you think you're okay. Then it taps you on the shoulder and says, now. It had been 2 weeks since everything came undone, since Jasper ended the engagement, since Celeste's business tanked, since the family group chat flatlined into radio silence. No more birthday updates, no baby announcements, no memes with sparkly quotes about keeping the peace, just quiet. And for once, I didn't rush to fill it. I let the stillness in, let it wrap around me like a weighted blanket I didn't know I needed. My mornings became rituals: coffee, window open, birds I didn't know the names of. I read books, took long walks, learned how to cook something besides toast. And every night, I wrote, not about them, about me. Not the version they tried to sell, dramatic, unstable, jealous, but the real me. The one who survived in silence for too long. The one who found her voice, not in rage, but in truth. One Tuesday morning, as I was cleaning out my inbox, I saw it. A new message from Mom. Subject: no greeting, no explanation, just one sentence. I hope you find what you're looking for. That was it. I stared at it for a while, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. For so long, I had begged for that woman to see me, to validate me, to reach back when I reached out. And now, I didn't need her to. I deleted the email, not in anger, in peace. That afternoon, I walked to the park down the street. The sun was soft. The breeze carried the kind of warmth that only shows up when you've decided to stop waiting for someone to apologize. I sat on a bench under a tree, older than any of my regrets. Across the grass, a little girl zipped by on a scooter, her parents cheering her on like she was flying. For a second, I felt something ache in my chest, a memory of my 7-year-old self, looking out a school auditorium window, wondering why no one came to her play. And then I let her go, not because she didn't matter, but because she mattered too much to keep locked in that moment. Closure doesn't always come in the form of apologies. Sometimes it's just the realization that the people who hurt you were never capable of loving you the way you needed. And that's not your fault. You don't have to keep sitting at a table that was never set for you. You don't have to keep chasing belonging from people who only know how to offer conditions. You get to build your own table. And when you do, you'll be shocked at who shows up. People who see you, people who love you not in spite of your voice, but because of it. If this story felt like yours too, drop a key in the comments. And if no one's told you this today, I see you. I believe you. You don't have to earn love by being quiet. You don't have to keep the peace by breaking yourself. You're allowed to leave. You're allowed to heal. You're allowed to begin again, even if that beginning starts at the very end. Thank you for being here. This is Lana Westbrook. And this is me, finally free. If this story resonated with you, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.